Stories are traditionally part of our magical heritage. The little story Moshko Gosha I mentioned, which is really a story, a magical story about magic, and it has a wonderful line in it. If you need enough and want little enough, you shall find wonderful food. If you need enough and want little enough, you shall find wonderful food. And it's that simple difference between the need of the soul, and the want, the desire of the ego. And the simplest way to tune into the magical dimension of our own nature and the magical dimension of life is to need enough and to want little enough. And then something in life responds with wonderful food, that life then, it is both the rational mind and the desires of the ego that cut ourselves off from the magic that is inherent in everything. At the same time, it is this need, the deep need of the soul to be nourished. And as I say, it's fascinating, the popularity of Harry Potter, just like Lord of the Rings, because they feed us with the magic for which we are so hungry. Lord of the Rings in particular is actually a very archetypal, numinous book. But there is this deep hunger in us for magic, for what is magical, because we are meant to be nourished by it, and we are instead left hungry. We don't have that wonderful food that we should, because we are so caught up in all of these distractions of our culture. But underneath this is a story, and often magic is told in stories. Nowadays, sadly, they have just become children's stories. But real stories belong to the in-between world, or to the worlds in between. They're actually woven into life. They're not just told. It's a strange part of our culture that people don't realize that nowadays, if you write a story, you're supposed to be original. It's very important to be original. In the 17th century, before the birth of the novel, you were never ever supposed to be original. You always had to say you got your story from somewhere else, because it was this heritage of the story. It was never supposed to be anything you made up. You actually had to give sources of where your stories came from, because this has to do with, again, this magical dimension that is woven into the whole myth of storytelling. The stories are born in the in-between worlds. They carry this magic. And the real story can reconnect us with the magic, can take us back into this numinous dimension that nourishes our soul. That's why storytelling and stories are so important for human beings, whether just an oral tradition told around the campfire, because it reconnects us with the soul and the stories of the soul. And there is a little hidden esoteric story within this, which has to do with the stories of love. Again, we think people make up stories. And you're even supposed to make up your own story. And you can get blamed for plagiarizing if you don't make up your own story. But life isn't actually like that. And your life isn't actually like that. And there are people who actually weave the stories of love into the fabric of the world. That is what they do. They tell the stories of love, and they weave those stories into the fabric of the world. And if there were no people weaving those stories of love, there would be no stories of love in this world. Everything comes, everything is a reflection. Everything is born in the inner worlds and comes into the outer world. We have lost that. We think it all belongs to us here. No. But there are master storytellers in the inner worlds. And at different times they have told stories of war, they have told stories of violence. And then those stories, the tales of the gods, have been acted out. But I am a Sufi and we have a different work to do. And our work is to weave the stories of love, to tell the stories of the heart in the inner worlds, so they are woven into the fabric of life. There's a certain color then in the warp and the woof of life. You know, it's like a tapestry, it's woven. You can see the threads if you look carefully. That's why I call one of my early books Catching the Thread. You see it in your dreams. These threads that are woven in the inner worlds, they have different colors, different meanings and different colors. And part of the, in a way, the work of the one who decides to make this inner journey, who decides to reclaim the magic, the mystery, the miracle that is a real human being, is to follow this thread, to follow the threads that are woven into their own story. It's actually something I have found interesting getting older, not just the aches and pains in the morning, but you can look back a little bit more and you can follow those threads that are woven into your life, those threads that gave you meaning, or those threads that took you down paths you shouldn't have traveled, or down unexpected paths that took you to magical doors that you walked through into whole new vistas of experience. You can begin to trace those threads in your own life. But just remember, the real threads, and particularly the threads of love, they are woven in the inner worlds. That's where the real stories are told. And that's why it can be helpful, just like you listen to your dreams, you listen to the stories of your soul, because they speak about the real magic that is within your soul, within your heart. We are made of stardust. Human beings are so extraordinary. And somehow, in this culture, we have been denied it. I call it, the greatest censorship that ever existed. It's like the burning of the books when the Library of Alexandria was burnt, or other times when all the books were burnt, like the great monasteries in Tibet. All the libraries were recently burnt this last century. And it is for us who turn inward to reclaim a little bit of this language of the soul, to follow these threads that are woven into our dreams. You listen to them with a different ear, with an ear attuned to the music of the soul, to that sensitivity, that sensibility. And then maybe we reclaim it for the world we live in. I was once told by one of the great beings of the inner world, they said, each time you come into our world with the right attitude of love and respect, when you go back to your world, you take a grain of sand, and over the years, those grains of sand form a mandala. And once the mandala is complete, the world can sing again. So it is important, following these threads of love, following this mystery of the heart, following the magic in our own dreams, dreams that can change your life. That we also weaving those threads into life for the whole. We are if you like, the shamans of the 21st century. It is always for the sake of the whole, always for the sake of life, because magic doesn't belong to anybody, just like a miracle doesn't belong to anybody. It is part of the bigger pattern of life. So those are the stories that we hold, that we live, that we follow. And as I said, there are, just as the founder of our order Bahauddin Naqshband was known as the Mushkil Gosher of the people of love. He removed the obstacles from the hearts. So there are also Sufis who tell the stories of love, who live the stories of love, because without those stories, without those threads of love, there would be no stories of love in the world. It just wouldn't be here. Where did they come from?